My parents erased me from their lives for 5 years because my sister told them I had dropped out of medical school. Last month, she showed up in my emergency room bleeding badly, and the trauma team called for the chief surgeon. The doors opened. My mother saw the name on my white coat. Her hand gripped my father's arm so tightly that he flinched. Growing up, my sister was always the brilliant one. Her name is Claire Bennett, and she could charm any adult in the room within minutes. My parents swallowed it all like dessert. I was the quiet kid with a science project and a second-place ribbon no one ever asked about. One weekend, I made it to the state science fair. That same weekend, Claire had a small role in a school play. Guess which event my parents said they absolutely couldn't miss. I stood next to my project table, scanning the room again and again, waiting for them to walk in. They never did. When I got accepted into medical school across the country, my father finally looked at me and said, "Maybe you'll actually make something of yourself." It wasn't love, but it felt like oxygen. Claire smiled too, but only with her mouth. After that, she started calling me more often, asking about classes, asking about professors, asking about exam dates. I thought she cared. What I didn't realize was that I was giving her ammunition. During my 3rd year of medical school, my best friend Lily Carter was diagnosed with late-stage cancer. She didn't have family nearby, just me. The university approved a formal leave so I could take care of her for a semester. There were forms to sign and meetings with the school, but none of that mattered. Lily was terrified, and she had no one else, so I stayed with her. I drove her to appointments, sat with her during treatments, slept in the uncomfortable chair beside her hospital bed when the nights got bad. At some point, exhausted and overwhelmed, I made the mistake of calling Claire. Part of me hoped that for once she might just act like a normal sister. Her voice turned soft immediately. She said she understood. She said she was proud of me for helping Lily. She even promised she wouldn't tell Mom and Dad because they would only worry. I believed her. 3 days later, my father called. His voice sounded colder than I had ever heard it. "Your sister told us everything." According to him, I had dropped out of school. Apparently, I had run off with someone. Apparently, I had thrown away my future. I tried to explain. I offered to send documents from the university. I told him he could call the dean himself if he wanted. He didn't let me finish. "Don't call this house again until you're ready to tell the truth." Then he hung up. After that, my number stopped working for them. My calls went straight to voicemail. My messages were never answered. A week later, my mother blocked me too. I sent them a letter trying to explain everything. It came back unopened. My mother's handwriting was on the envelope, like I was junk mail. Like I was something that could simply be returned to sender. Lily died that winter. I was the only person in the hospital room when the monitor finally went flat. The sound of that machine going silent stayed with me for a long time. After the nurses finished their work and the room emptied, I sat there alone for a while. Before everything happened, Lily had slipped a note inside my anatomy textbook. I didn't find it until weeks later. It only had one sentence written on it. "Finish. Don't let blood decide your worth." So I finished. I went back to medical school. I graduated. Then came residency. Long nights, endless shifts, years of learning how to stay calm while someone's life hung in the balance. Eventually, I became a trauma surgeon. I got married. Her name is Caroline Hayes. She met me during my last year of residency and somehow decided I was worth keeping around even though I was exhausted most of the time. When we got married, I sent invitations to my parents in Hartford, Connecticut anyway. Part of me still hoped they would show up. Every envelope came back the same way, unopened, returned. Like the others, like I had never existed. Years passed, and then last month, at 3:07 a.m., my pager went off. Severe car accident, unstable vitals, possible abdominal bleeding. The kind of case that wakes up the entire trauma team. I walked toward the nurse's station while pulling on my surgical cap. The admission chart was waiting on the counter. I picked it up and glanced at the name. Claire Bennett, my sister. For exactly 3 seconds, I didn't move. The hallway clock ticks loudly enough that you can hear every second. Tick, tick, tick. Then my feet started moving again. The chart looked like every trauma admission I had seen in the last 6 years. Name, age, blood type, mechanism of injury, female patient, 31 years old, severe internal bleeding. Her name was still there when I looked again. "Dr. Hayes." The voice came from the other side of the desk. It was Maria Delgado, one of the triage nurses. "She's already on the way to OR3. The team's waiting." I folded the chart and tucked it under my arm. "I'm coming." For a moment, I considered stepping away. Technically, I could have declared a conflict of interest. Another surgeon could have taken the case. That would have been the safe option. the reasonable one. But abdominal hemorrhage doesn't wait while someone sorts out family history. So I pushed open the doors to operating room 3. The room was already prepared. Bright white lights, cold air, metal instruments arranged neatly on the tray. My team stood ready. Dr. Patel at anesthesia, Nurse Grant circulating, Ben at the instrument table. Chief surgeon in the room, Maria announced behind me. No one asked questions. After 6 years running trauma surgery, people learn not to waste time before an operation. I walked to the sink and began scrubbing my hands. 80 seconds, counting each one, water running over my knuckles, between my fingers, under my nails. I pulled on the gloves, adjusted my mask, then stepped up to the operating table. It was the first time I had seen my sister in 5 years. Bruises covered part of her forehead and neck. The oxygen mask hid half her face. The heart monitor beside her bed beeped unevenly. Her blood pressure was still dropping. I forced myself to look at the facts. Not my sister, just the patient. Vitals on arrival? I asked. Dr. Patel answered without looking up. Blood pressure 84/50 when she came in, now 78/48. Heart rate 118. Oxygen 91% with support. She paused briefly. Fast scan shows internal bleeding, likely severe spleen injury. Blood transfusion already running. Good. All right, I said. Let's begin. The surgery lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. There was a moment, about halfway through, when her blood pressure dropped suddenly. The monitor started beeping faster, the sharp warning sound that every surgeon learns to recognize even in their sleep. Pressure falling, Dr. Patel said. Ben already had the instrument in his hand before I asked for it. Nurse Grant started calling out numbers every 30 seconds. The room moved with the kind of quiet coordination that only comes from years of working together. My hands didn't shake. Not because I was brave, because they had been trained not to. 10 years of surgical training teaches your body something important: how to separate what you feel from what you do. The body learns the job. The emotions come later, sometimes much later. We repaired the damage, controlled the bleeding, cleared the abdominal cavity, then closed the incision layer by layer. When the monitor finally showed stable numbers again, I stepped back. Her blood pressure had climbed to 102/64. The room felt quieter. I placed the instrument back on the tray. Good work, I said. It wasn't politeness, it was information. The team had done their job well. Dr. Patel checked the monitor one more time. She'll be in recovery in 15 minutes. I nodded. Then I walked out of the operating room. I removed my gloves in the hallway and dropped them into the red container without looking. At the end of the corridor, there's a water fountain most people avoid. The water always comes out slightly warm. I took 3 long drinks anyway. That's when I saw them. My parents were sitting in the waiting area behind the glass wall that separates the surgery wing from the family area. My father held my mother's hand tightly between both of his. She was leaning forward, crying into a tissue. My father wasn't crying. He was staring at the operating room doors like he could see through them if he focused hard enough. 5 years. 5 years without seeing my face, without hearing my voice, without answering a single letter. Now they were staring at the name stitched on my coat. Dr. Daniel Hayes, Chief of Trauma Surgery. I stood on the other side of the glass for a moment, not because it was dramatic, because I needed to organize what I was about to say. Talking to families after surgery is something surgeons learn to do carefully. You keep the emotions under control. You give the information clearly. You avoid unnecessary words. When I was ready, I pushed open the door to the waiting room. My mother looked up first. Her face changed instantly. It was a strange mixture of relief and shock, and something else. Something that looked a lot like fear. My father stood up automatically. The kind of reflex people have when someone with authority enters a room. I stopped about 6 feet away, the same distance I keep with every patient's family. My name is Dr. Hayes, I said calmly. I'm the trauma surgeon who operated on your daughter. Silence filled the room. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. My mother squeezed the tissue in her hands. The surgery was successful, I continued. She had a severe spleen injury with internal bleeding. We repaired the damage and stopped the hemorrhage. She's currently being moved to recovery. My mother whispered something. At first, I didn't realize she had said my name, Daniel. Her voice sounded fragile, small. It was the first time I had heard my name from her in 5 years. Daniel? Is that really you? I didn't answer the question. A nurse will come speak with you once she's stable enough for visitors, I said. The first 24 hours are important. They'll be monitoring her blood pressure and blood levels closely. My father took one step closer. Son. That word hung in the air, 5 years without hearing it. And somehow it sounded exactly the same, like something said out of habit more than recognition. If there are no more medical questions, I said, keeping my voice steady, I'll let you rest. Daniel, wait, my mother stood up. Her legs shook slightly. Please. Just a moment. I stopped. Not because I needed whatever she wanted to say, because stopping was the professional thing to do. We didn't know, she said quickly. Your sister told us you dropped out. She said you ran away with someone. She said you refused to talk to her. Her words rushed out in uneven breaths. We thought you had ruined your life. With respect, I interrupted calmly. That's not medical information. They both stared at me. If you need emotional support during your daughter's recovery, the hospital has social workers available. Their office is down the hall. My father lifted one hand slightly. Not to touch me. Just a small gesture. We're not asking you to understand right now. I looked at him. I will keep you informed about the patient's condition, I said. That's what I can offer tonight. Then I turned and walked back into the corridor. Behind me, the waiting room fell silent again. I walked to the staff bathroom at the end of the hallway, the small one. The one with the flickering fluorescent light. I took off my surgical cap, turned on the faucet, and splashed cold water across my face, twice. Then I looked at the mirror. The man staring back at me had a white coat with haze stitched above the pocket. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there at 23, back when he had slipped a note into his anatomy textbook and promised himself he would finish, that he wouldn't let blood decide his worth. I had finished. And now my parents were sitting in the waiting room of my hospital, waiting for news about the daughter they had believed, while reading the name of the son they had erased. I turned off the water, dried my hands, and walked back into the hallway. There were still 3 other patients in observation, and my shift didn't end until 8 a.m. The work didn't wait. Around 6 o'clock in the morning, with my shift finally close to ending, I stopped by the recovery unit. It was part of my normal routine. Before handing off my patients to the next team, I always check on everyone who came out of surgery during my shift. There was no reason to skip that room. I walked in quietly. The nurse on duty, a young woman named Rachel, who had been in the unit for a few months, looked up from the chart. Vitals have been stable all night, she said. Blood pressure 108/70. Hemoglobin at 9.2. Urine output steady. Good, I said. I checked the monitor, checked the IV line, checked the bandages covering the surgical site. No visible bleeding. No early signs of complications. If the hemoglobin reaches 9.8 at the noon test, I said, you can slow the transfusion. Rachel nodded and wrote it down. Yes, doctor. My sister was lying in the bed, her eyes closed, but something about the way she held herself made me think she wasn't actually asleep. Her breathing was steady, but her body felt too still, like someone pretending not to be awake. I didn't say anything. I finished checking the chart and walked out. In the hallway, my parents were still there. They had clearly spent the entire night in the waiting room. My mother was asleep in the chair, leaning against my father's shoulder. My father was awake. When he saw me step out of the room, he carefully shifted so he wouldn't wake her and stood up. I stopped where I was. He walked halfway toward me, then stopped too. Like he understood he shouldn't come any closer without permission. How is she? He asked quietly. Stable, I replied. She's responding well. If everything stays the same, she'll probably move to a regular room later today. He nodded slowly, then looked down at the floor. You've been here all night, he said. My shift. When does it end? About an hour. There was a long pause. My father clasped his hands together in front of him. I remembered that gesture from when I was a kid. He used to do that whenever he didn't know what to say, but felt like he should say something. Your sister told us many things over the years, he finally said. Things I'm not sure I believe anymore. I didn't answer. She told us you quit medical school, that you ran off with someone, that she tried to reach you, but you ignored her. He took a slow breath. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what we believed. I know, I said. He looked up. I know exactly what she told you. I paused for a moment before continuing, and I also know that you chose to believe her without checking anything, without calling the university, without trying another way to reach me, without opening a single letter I sent. I held his gaze. That wasn't a misunderstanding, Dad. That was a decision. I didn't say it angrily. I said it the way surgeons give diagnoses. Clear, direct, without decoration. My father didn't respond right away. He blinked several times, then looked down again. "You're right," he said quietly. Those two words surprised me, even though I didn't show it. "You're right," he repeated. "And I don't have any excuse." He looked back up at me. If we had known, if we had even suspected. There were 12 letters, I said. I counted. Silence. "I'm going home to rest," I said after a moment. "If anything changes with the patient, the nurses will inform you." I turned to leave. His voice stopped me. "Daniel." I paused. "Are you okay?" The question caught me off guard. I tried to remember the last time someone in my family had asked me that. I couldn't. Maybe never. "Yes," I said. "I have a very good life." And then I walked away. I slept for 4 hours at home. When I woke up, Caroline was already in the kitchen making coffee. Our 4-year-old son, Ethan, was still asleep in his room. Caroline knows me well enough not to ask questions right away. She waited until I sat down with the coffee before speaking. "How was the shift?" "Long." I took a sip, then said the words as calmly as possible. "I operated on my sister." Caroline set her cup down slowly. "Is she alive?" "Yes, she'll recover." "And your parents?" They were in the waiting room. Caroline pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. She didn't touch my hand. She didn't interrupt. That's something I've always appreciated about her. She understands that sometimes silence is the most helpful response. "Did you talk to them?" she asked after a moment. "I gave them a medical update." She studied my face for a few seconds. "I know that look. It's the one she uses when she's listening for the part I'm not saying." "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about the question. Not the hospital answer, the real one. "I don't know yet," I admitted. When I saw her name on the chart, I expected to feel something big. Anger? Pain? Something? But I didn't. I stared down at the coffee in my hands. I just saw a patient with internal bleeding. Caroline nodded slowly. "That's not a bad thing." "I didn't say it was bad," I replied. "It's just strange." I leaned back in the chair. I spent 5 years imagining what I would say if I ever saw them again. And when the moment came, I shrugged slightly. "All I gave them was a surgical report." Caroline nodded again. "That makes sense," she said. "You've spent 6 years as a trauma surgeon. That's how you handle pressure." "Yeah." "Do you think you'll see them again?" "They'll probably come back while she's still in the hospital." I carried my empty cup to the sink. "If they have medical questions, I'll answer them." I turned back toward the table. "If they want to talk about anything else," I paused. "We'll see." At that moment, we heard movement from Ethan's room. A few seconds later, his sleepy voice echoed down the hallway. "Dad?" "I'm here," I called back. Small footsteps rushed toward the kitchen. Ethan appeared in the doorway with his hair messy and his eyes still half closed. "Did you come back from work?" I did. He ran across the room and hugged my legs. I rested a hand on his head. My parents had never met him. They had a 4-year-old grandson they didn't even know existed. They had sent back the envelope with his baby picture the same way they sent back all the others. Unopened. Returned. Like I was something that could be mailed away. "Are you working today?" Ethan asked. "Later," I said. "This morning I'm home." His eyes lit up. "Can we play?" "Of course." I lifted him onto my shoulder. He laughed loudly. Caroline watched us from the table with a small smile. Somewhere across the city, my parents were probably still sitting in that hospital waiting room with their paper cups of machine coffee and plastic chairs. But I was here, in my kitchen, with my son on my shoulder, and the smell of fresh coffee in the air. They had chosen not to be part of this life. On the 3rd day, my sister asked to see me. She didn't ask me directly. She told the nurse. Rachel found me during the afternoon rounds and spoke in the neutral tone nurses use when something isn't really their problem. "Room 14 asked if you could stop by, doctor," she said. "She says it's personal." "Tell her I'll come during rounds," I replied. I arrived around 5 in the afternoon. My parents weren't in the hallway. I had seen them walking toward the cafeteria earlier. Inside the room, the lights were dim. I checked the chart first. Vitals stable, hemoglobin improving, recovery moving exactly the way it should. Then I pulled the chair near the window and placed it about 5 feet from the bed before sitting down. My sister watched me. Her name was Claire Bennett, and for most of my life she had been the person everyone noticed first when she entered a room. Now she looked smaller. Her hair was tied back loosely. Her face had no makeup. The bruises across her forehead were turning yellow as they healed. An IV line ran into her left arm. "Nobody charms a room from a hospital bed. Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice sounded rough, for operating on me. "It was my shift," I replied. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. "You could have passed the case to another surgeon." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" "Because you had active internal bleeding and there wasn't time." She nodded slowly. For a moment, she watched the IV drip beside her bed. "Daniel," she said. "I'm your doctor this week," I replied calmly. "If it makes things easier, you can call me Dr. Hayes." Something moved across her face. Not anger, something closer to shame. "Okay," she said after a moment. "Dr. Hayes, I need to tell you something. I'm listening." She stared at the ceiling for several seconds before speaking. It was a gesture I remembered from childhood. Claire always did that when she was about to say something she knew would have consequences. "When you were in your 3rd year," she began slowly, "I started noticing something." She took a breath. "You were better than me." I didn't react. "Not necessarily in grades," she continued, "but in the way you thought. The professors remembered you. They talked about the questions you asked." Her eyes shifted toward me. "Mom and Dad always told me I was the brilliant one, but I could see what was happening. You were the one who was going to go further." She paused. "And that scared me." I stayed silent. "When you told me about your friend, about the leave from school," she continued, "I saw an opportunity." Her voice stayed steady. That almost made it worse. "If Mom and Dad heard you had stopped attending classes, even temporarily, they would be disappointed." She looked down at her hands. "And I wanted them to be disappointed in you for once." The monitor beside her bed continued its steady rhythm. Out in the hallway, someone pushed a cart past the door. "What I didn't expect," she said quietly, "was that they would erase you completely. I thought they would get angry, maybe argue with you. I didn't think they would block your number. I didn't think they would return your letters." "When did you realize what you had done?" I asked. "When the invitation to your wedding came back." She looked at me. "I sent one too, directly to you. I thought enough time had passed. When it came back unopened, I realized the damage was worse than I had planned." "And you didn't tell them the truth?" "No. Why?" Claire took a long breath. "Because telling the truth meant admitting what I had done. And admitting that meant losing the place I had with them." She lowered her eyes. "I was always the favorite, Daniel. That might not sound like a good reason to you, but it was the only thing I had that you didn't." The room went quiet for several seconds. "Are you finished?" I asked. She looked up. "Yes." "Good." I stood up and pushed the chair back toward the window. "I'm going to say something once," I told her. "I won't repeat it." Claire nodded slowly. "What you did had real consequences, not abstract ones. Real ones." I paused. "My best friend died that winter. I was the only person in the room with her because my family had blocked my number and there was no one else to call. I graduated without anyone there. I got married without anyone there. My son is 4 years old and our parents don't even know his name." I let the silence settle. "That wasn't a misunderstanding that spiraled out of control. That was the direct result of what you chose to do." Claire held my gaze. Her eyes were wet now, but she didn't cry. "I know," she said quietly. "Can you forgive me?" The question was direct. I respected that. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Right now, no. Maybe someday. Maybe not." I picked up the chart from the foot of the bed. "What I can tell you is that you're going to leave this hospital in good physical condition. That's the commitment I made when I walked into operating room 3. And after that?" she asked. "That part isn't up to me." I walked toward the door. Her voice stopped me. "Daniel." I paused but didn't turn. "I'm sorry about Lily," she said, "and I'm sorry you were alone that night." It was the first time anyone in my family had said Lily's name. In 5 years. I didn't respond. I just walked out into the hallway, right into my parents, who were returning from the cafeteria with 2 paper cups of coffee. My mother looked at me with a question in her eyes. My father gave a small nod. "I just checked on the patient," I said. "She's recovering well. If tomorrow's blood test looks good, they'll stop the transfusion." "Thank you," my father said. My mother hesitated, then she spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." Her voice was careful. "Do you have a family? I mean, are you happy?" I thought about Caroline making coffee that morning, about Ethan running down the hallway with messy hair. "Yes," I said. "I have a family." Then I kept walking. My parents were waiting in the parking lot. It wasn't accidental. When I left the hospital at 7:00 p.m. on the 5th day, I saw them standing near the concrete wall beside the staff exit. My father had his hands in his coat pockets. My mother held her purse with both hands, pressed tightly against her chest like she needed something to hold on to. I stopped walking. I could have turned around. I could have left through the main entrance instead, but that would have meant avoiding them. And I didn't owe them fear. I walked toward them. "We knew you came out this way," my father said. "One of the nurses mentioned your shift ended around 7. I made a mental note to remind the staff about privacy rules. What do you need?" I asked. My mother stepped forward, then stopped about 3 feet away, like there was an invisible line she didn't dare cross. "We need to talk," she said. "Not about Claire, about us." "We already talked in the hallway," I replied. That wasn't enough. I glanced at my watch. Caroline knew hospital shifts could run late, so time wasn't really the problem. The real issue was that conversations like this rarely ended quickly. "You have 10 minutes, I said. "There's a bench over there." We sat down. I chose one end. My parents sat together on the other side. My mother still held her purse against her chest. My father spoke first. "I found the letters." I looked at him. "The ones we sent back." He swallowed. "Your mother kept them in a box. I don't know why, but she did." He paused. "Last night we opened them." I didn't say anything. "The invitation to your graduation. The wedding invitation. The picture of the baby." His voice cracked slightly on the last sentence. "There was one letter," he continued slowly. "You described the hospital where you started your residency. You wrote that you arrived so early on the first day the parking lot was empty. You said you bought coffee from a machine in the hallway and sat there thinking about us. I remembered that letter. I had written it at 6 in the morning, sitting on a hard bench with the worst coffee I had ever tasted, feeling proud. And sad at the same time. I mailed it 3 days later. It came back unopened within a week. "Good," I said simply. My mother finally spoke. "Daniel." Her voice was tight, controlled. "We made a terrible mistake." "Yes," I said. "We did," my father added quickly. "But you need to understand something. If we had opened even one of those letters—" "Mom," I interrupted calmly, "I'm not interested in discussing what might have happened if you had made different choices." She nodded slowly. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. I wondered briefly if she was holding back on purpose. Tears wouldn't change anything with me. "What can we do?" my father asked. "Tell us what you need from us." "Nothing," he frowned. "That's not an angry answer," I clarified. "It's literal. I don't need anything. My life works. I have a job. I have a wife. I have a son. There isn't an empty space that you need to fill." My mother closed her eyes for a moment. Then she asked the question I had been expecting since the first night in the waiting room. "Can we meet him?" "Your son." Her voice was barely above a whisper. I took a breath. "His name is Ethan," I said. "He's 4 years old. He likes dinosaurs and fire trucks. He sleeps with a stuffed whale named Oliver." I paused. "I'm telling you this because you deserve the information, not because it's an invitation." My mother pressed her lips together. "When could we—" "I don't know," I said. "That's not a decision I'm making in a parking lot after a 5-day shift. That's something Caroline and I decide together. And it depends on what's best for Ethan." "Of course," my father said quickly. "You're right." I stood up, pulled my car keys from my pocket. "But I'll tell you this now," I said. "If there's ever contact, it happens on our terms. No surprise visits. No trying to fix 5 years in one afternoon." I looked at both of them. "Is that clear?" "Yes," my father said. My mother nodded. "Good." I turned toward my car. "How is Caroline?" my mother asked suddenly. The question surprised me. "Is she happy?" It was a strange thing for her to ask, a question she didn't really have the right to ask, but it didn't sound malicious. "Yes," I said. "She's very happy." My mother nodded slowly. "I'm glad. You deserve that, Daniel." "You always did." I didn't respond, because any response would only start another conversation, and the 10 minutes were already over. "Claire will be discharged on Monday," I said. "You should schedule a follow-up appointment for Wednesday with her regular doctor. I'll leave the instructions in her chart." "Thank you," my father said. I walked to my car. "Daniel," it was my mother again. I stopped but didn't turn around. "Do you think there will ever be a day when you can look at us without seeing the parents who failed you?" I thought about that for a moment. "I don't know," I said, but if that day ever comes, you'll be the first to know. I got into the car, started the engine. As I drove out of the parking lot, I saw them in the rearview mirror, still standing next to the bench, watching the car disappear. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the driveway at home. Caroline opened the door before I even knocked. Ethan stood behind her holding his stuffed whale. "Dad! Oliver wants to show you something." "What does Oliver want to show me?" I asked. "He learned how to swim." "Oh, really? Stuffed whales can swim now?" "Oliver can." Caroline looked at me over Ethan's head. A silent question. I nodded once. "I'm okay." She nodded back. I stepped inside, closed the door. Outside the hospital parking lot, the bench and the past stayed where they were. Inside the house was the life I had built, and the family that chose me. Claire was discharged on Monday, exactly as expected. I wasn't at the hospital that day. It was my day off, and I spent it at home with Caroline and Ethan, trying not to think about anything related to work or the past. Caroline once told me that my face changes slightly when I'm thinking about something I don't want to think about. She says the muscles around my eyes tighten in a way I don't notice. She didn't mention it that Monday, but she quietly refilled my coffee twice and put on a dinosaur movie for Ethan that was long enough for us to talk in the kitchen without interruptions. "Do you know when your sister leaves the hospital?" she asked. "She left this morning." Caroline nodded. "How do you feel about that?" "Relieved," I said, and it was true. There was no longer any reason for my parents to be at the hospital, no reason for me to run into them in the hallway again. "Do you think they'll try to contact you?" she asked. "Probably." I took a sip of coffee. I told them the conditions. If they respect them, fine. If they don't, I shrugged. I know what to do. Caroline studied my face for a moment. "And Claire?" That question was harder. With my parents, things were simple. They made choices. I set boundaries. The next move was theirs. With Claire, it was different. Claire had looked me in the eye and told the truth, not a convenient version. The real one. The one that made her entirely responsible. I didn't know what to do with that yet. "I'm not sure," I said. Caroline nodded and didn't ask anything else. 3 weeks later, I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. It only had 2 sentences. "This is Claire. I know you probably don't have my number saved. You can delete this if you want. I just wanted to tell you I started working at a veterinary clinic. Reception desk. It's not medicine, but it's a start. I'm okay." I read the message twice, then locked the phone without replying. That evening, I showed it to Caroline. She read it quietly and handed the phone back. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know. Do you want to answer?" "I don't want anything yet," I said honestly. "I need time to figure out what I want." Caroline nodded. "Then take the time." What I didn't tell her, because I wasn't sure how to explain it yet, was the strange feeling the message left behind. It wasn't anger. It wasn't relief either. It was something closer to curiosity. Claire had completed 3 years of medical school before everything fell apart. For the last 5 years, she had been living a life I knew nothing about. Now she was working reception at a veterinary clinic, calling it a start. That didn't sound like the Claire I remembered. The Claire I knew always needed to be the most impressive person in the room. Something had changed. I didn't know if it was permanent. I didn't know if it mattered to me. But I noticed it. About a month later, my father called the hospital office phone, not my personal number, which meant he had asked reception for it, explained who he was, and waited until they transferred the call. It was a deliberate effort. I answered, "Daniel." "Dad, I hope I'm not interrupting." "I have 10 minutes before my next patient." "Good," he said. "I'll be brief." I heard him take a breath. "Your mother and I started therapy, a family therapist. We're trying to understand what happened, not to justify it, to make sure we never repeat it." He paused. "And we wanted to ask if someday, when you decide you're ready, you might join us for a session." I didn't answer immediately. "I'm not asking for an answer now," he added quickly. "I just wanted you to know we're doing the work." "Who's the therapist?" I asked. It wasn't curiosity. It was practical information. If they were going to do it, they should do it properly. "Dr. Villanueva. Our family doctor recommended her." "Good," I said. A small pause. "I'm glad you're doing it." "Would you consider coming?" he asked. "When you're ready?" "I don't know," I said, "but I won't rule it out." That answer surprised even me, but it was honest. "Thank you." my father said quietly. Take care, I replied. Then I hung up. My next patient was already waiting. A 52-year-old man with a recurrent abdominal hernia who needed to discuss surgery options. Work continued. Life continued. Over the next few months, I occasionally received short messages from my mother, every 2 or 3 weeks. Updates. Nothing demanding a reply. Sometimes I answered with a sentence or two. From those messages, I learned that Claire had moved into a smaller apartment, that she had started therapy as well, that she had tried to reconnect with some people from medical school. Most of them didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, just because 5 years is a long time. People move on. I understood that part. I had done the same. They had stayed with the version of me Claire created. I had built a life without them. Eventually, my father called again. They had been attending therapy for several months by then. He asked if I would come to one session. No expectations, just a conversation. I talked about it with Caroline for a long time. She didn't tell me what to do. She just asked the right questions until I reached the answer on my own. 7 months after the night of the accident, I walked into a gray office building on Constitution Avenue. The therapist's office was on the 4th floor. I arrived 10 minutes early, sat in the waiting room, drank a cup of water from the small dispenser, looked at my phone without really reading anything. My parents arrived 2 minutes later. My mother saw me first. She paused for a second, then quietly sat on the opposite side of the room. My father sat next to her. None of us spoke. 8 minutes later, the door opened. Daniel? The therapist said gently. We all stood. The office was simple, 3 chairs arranged in a triangle. Dr. Villanueva sat across from us with a small notebook. Before we begin, she said calmly, I'd like each of you to tell me in one sentence what you hope to get from today. My mother spoke first. I want my son to know that what we did destroyed us inside, even if we never admitted it. My father went next. I want to understand how we made those decisions, so we never repeat them with our grandson. Then it was my turn. I thought about it for a moment. I want to see if something functional can exist between us, I said, not what we had before. Something new. The session lasted an hour. There was a moment near the end when my mother said something I never expected to hear. I knew Claire was lying. My father looked at her in shock. Not the details, she continued, but something in her story didn't make sense, and I chose not to question it. Because questioning it meant admitting we had been unfair to Daniel long before that. For the first time in my life, someone in my family said it out loud, not as a suggestion, as a fact. When the session ended, we stepped into the hallway together. The elevator took a long time. Will you come again next week? My father asked quietly. I'll let you know. My mother reached into her purse. She handed me a small envelope. This is for Ethan, she said. You don't have to give it to him. I just wanted you to have it. I took the envelope, didn't open it yet. We rode the elevator down in silence. At the lobby we separated. They walked toward the parking garage. I walked toward the street. Daniel, my mother said softly. I turned. Thank you for coming. I didn't say you're welcome. I said the only thing that was honest. I'll see you next week. That night after Ethan was asleep, Caroline and I sat at the kitchen table. The envelope lay between us. Should we open it? She asked. Yes. Inside was a small photograph, old, matte paper. The kind printed at a pharmacy. It showed a 6-year-old boy standing beside a science fair project. A second-place ribbon was pinned to his shirt. He looked serious. Too serious for a kid that age. On the back of the photo, in my mother's handwriting, were a few words. That day we went to Claire's play. I found this picture last month. Someone was there. I looked at the photo for a long moment, then placed it back in the envelope and slid it into the kitchen drawer where we keep important things. Ethan's passport, the apartment contract, and Lily's note from the anatomy book. Caroline looked at me. Are you okay? Yes, I said. And this time it was completely true. I walked to Ethan's room and opened the door quietly. He was asleep on his back with his stuffed whale under one arm. The hallway light touched his face. Children sleep with a kind of absolute trust, like the world is a safe place. I watched him for a moment, then closed the door softly. When I returned to the kitchen, Caroline was still sitting at the table with her tea. I think I'll go to the next session, I said. Do you want me there? She asked. Not yet, but soon. She nodded. And Ethan? When the time is right, not before. Caroline reached across the table and held my hand. Outside, cars passed on the street. Inside, the kitchen light stayed on. There was a photograph of a quiet 6-year-old boy in the drawer, a boy with a second-place ribbon and no parents in the audience. That boy had grown up. He had built a life without asking anyone for permission, and now, from that life, he could decide what to do with the people who hadn't been there, not for them. For him. For the boy in the photo, because that boy deserved to have the decision made from strength, not from the wound, and for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly how to do that.